Now we go on to taking measures. Knowing what measures to take, obviously. So we have a few circumference measures. That's the neck, the chest, the waist, and the hip.
Are you going to double those, like you did with me? So you had like
no. I
chest
slightly changed this. No, I slightly because that was too intuitive. I could never translate that into anything mechanical. So I thought about that a little bit more, and this just is going to lock into what we discussed with the negative shape thing. So you just carve the block out. And that's basically it. So we're going to try that in a second. So we'll see how that goes. So then we have that's the circumference measures. You take them as they are. Okay. I'm thinking still about this whether we should add ease as we are measuring or add ease later once you have the net measure. That's something that we have to go through and see what works best. So far, I think it's better to measure the ease while you're measuring, because then you don't need to think about adding ease on the pattern. Because then you're adding ease plus the seams, plus the this, plus the that. You just have one measure and that incorporates everything, right?
But would it not be easier to take the actual measure, because then you're not having to instruct how much ease to add for different styles of coats? So if someone wanted like a really loose fitted coat, and you have two theoretical, students who are, one wants a really big baggy coat, one wants a super fitted coat.
Yeah.
Then they have to know how much ease to add when they're measuring.
Yes, I agree. That could actually be very practical. Let's see how that goes, because I would be fully on board with that if it would be super simple and would simplify our thing. And so I'd like to see how that goes. Let's see. The only thing that I would think, the only reason why I would think not to do that is because then you also need to specify and break down the entire process of what the ease is based on. You know what I mean?
Explain.
So suppose I say, hey, for this garment, make the chest plus 5 inches ease, and for that garment, make the chest plus 3 inches of ease. Then you have to explain why 5 and why 3. And then you also need to have a good reason of why 5 and why 3.
But, no, see, I don't know. Sorry. Again, going back to those images of like the silhouettes of guys, I think there's a visual understanding. That guy has a big stomach, that guy's really tall, that guy's really thin. If you could even put down as a key, like 4 different styles of jackets, like super fitted. And you
3 categories, basically.
This is a fitted garment. If this is what you kind of want, add 3. If this is what you want, add 4. So then it becomes.
What's the 4 based on then, if someone asks?
I guess it's
you just say the more ease, the more room it is to. The more roomy the jacket is.
But then why 4, not 4.5? For example, I'm just stupid student asking the question. So.
But again, you could add 4 in it. Like ultimately, you could add 7.
Yeah. So that's a tricky point for me, because I'm thinking if you don't have a super sharp, definite answer, then you create swamps of then what you basically don't want an insecure student being there and be like, the person said I could do 4 or 4.5. Now I have to think for half an hour and decide whether I'm going to go for 4 or 4.5 because I don't know what it's based on.
Maybe it should be after. So do this as is.
Yes.
And then at the end of the drafting system, when they've finished it and they've got their block or whatever, you can then have an additional section that says if you want to manipulate this block to be a super sculpted coat, this is what you do next. If you then want to go and have a really drapey front chest, like very Anderson and Shepherd, you do this kind of thing. You add extra to the cross chest. You keep the armhole really high, and then the same with Liverano doesn't put front cuts in, so you could do that. And you want to make a Liverano Italian style coat, you don't put any shoulder pad on. When you measure the shoulder angle, you don't put your front cut in, and you do this. Maybe it's that, but then obviously that's up to them.
Yeah,
that could be the advanced section.
It definitely isn't advanced, and I like your idea of categories. It makes sense perfectly to say super fitted, medium fitted, loose, super loose, for example. And then for each you just assign a number, and then you explain to them, well, this number is just chosen by the author or whatever, by us, but you could change the numbers as you wish.
Exactly.
But then here's another thing. Sorry, the devil is in my head now. Here's another thing. If you tell them they could change it at will, and they change it at will, and it messes up the draft, and then they get wrong results, then I think it's our responsibility to create a system of how you add ease based on something that wouldn't mess up the draft.
Well, so that poses a good question. How do you anticipate adding different amounts of ease would? Because I don't see how it would unless you take it to the extreme. You know, if you wanted to put a half an inch of ease, that's the extreme, and obviously that would not mess up the draft, it would mess up the fit.
Yeah.
Adding 15, 20 inches of ease wouldn't mess up necessarily the draft, it would mess up the fit.
Yeah.
And it's about, I think if we go back to the basic resolution images of the human body, we can't give them every single permutation of the human form. There is kind of an expectation that this is the basis, and then there's kind of a ... play around, understand how this might differ.
And develop your judgment, basically.
Exactly.
Yes.
So by saying like, our standard is this, 3 inches for fitted, 4 inches for this, 6 inches, whatever, you could say, these are what we would start with. Beginners should start with this and then add or subtract at the fitting. More advanced cutters can play around with the amounts of ease at the drafting stage.
Yeah. I agree with that. By the way, I have to say, if you go through this a few times, the most essential things are broken down into such clear visual images in your mind that you actually can do whatever you want. So then you can say, like what I was doing when I was measuring Kim, didn't look like I was doing any scientific work. I was just like, you guys were like, I was just like wrapping tapes around her, just like pretty much looked random. But I knew what I was doing. So we could then say, well, it wouldn't be a problem for them to be confused about the ease, because then if they actually go through this as a basic starting point, then their intuition would just abstract it out and then allow them to play with it, right? Something like that.
Because and the one thing that I used to tell students when I get interns or anything is that one of the main differences between a professional pattern cutter and a new pattern cutter, a student, was that the professional pattern cutter would trust their instincts and their common sense. And so what would often happen is you'd get a trouser pattern they would start out, front, side, then they would plot their waist, and they'd say, I want it to be this and this, the knee, and then for some reason, as you've probably always seen, they're like, oh, the hip's coming out to here. And they're like, well, that's what the draft says. And we talked about it, you pointed that out with the back, and you just say, well, we know that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so by using your common sense and what every pattern cutter would do is make that work and see how they can play around with getting the measure right.
Yeah.
So I think we need to also kind of imbue that into the draft. It's like, we need you to use common sense and trust that if something doesn't look right, it's probably not right.
Yeah. I have an issue with that, Matthew.
What do you tell them?
Not because what you're saying is wrong. What you're saying is right.
Yeah.
I have a practical and technical issue with that, because what we're trying to figure out is, what did the cutter know to know that wouldn't work? And the cutter has worked probably with fabric, made a few curved seams, and then understood like, oh yeah, really severe curves don't work. So then that's one element. And then I'm like, what are all the other intuitive points that we could extract out, articulate, incorporate within the system that a curve like that in the first place becomes impossible? You know what I mean? So that's what you're saying is 100% correct. Now we have to make sure that we can mechanically just translate it into a formula. That's roughly what I'm getting at.
No, absolutely. And I think that if we had drafts that started with our basic, you know, slim, fitted, you know, loose and extra loose, it would work. But if someone was like, you know what, I want to throw out, see what 12 inches of ease would look like.
Yeah.
Then they would need to know if they're going off piste and they're kind of doing their own thing, you might get these really abstract shapes, and they need to have the common sense to say, okay, that won't work. Visually.
We could say, here is 2 inches of ease for this garment, 3 inches for this, 4 inches, blah, 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 and then say, if you choose to go for the 5 inch of ease, these are the things that are likely going to happen, and then here's why, maybe. But hopefully it's already addressed so that they can already figure it out. I feel like you want to say something, Kim.
I just remember being in like college and being like, don't know what a fly should look like. Looks alright, but you don't have that eye honed yet to go, God, I've really scooped that too far. So I don't know how you would get a new student that's coming to this to go, that looks a bit weird.
I've addressed a part of it further down the slides, but what you say is, if your teacher would tell you where the fly relates to and how it relates to like 3 different variations and what the purpose is of that curve, you could then abstract that out and think on that spot, this is pointy, this is too scooped, this is too flat or whatsoever, right? So it's what you need to know beyond just the formula as well. And then hopefully you can incorporate that within the formula, or even leave it out, something like that. We'll see how it goes. But agree with you.
Hopefully with Kim's point that these sketches here already give you that rough shape. Now obviously with a fly it's different, but for the jacket, if you're knowing that is your essential shape, then you already have because that's what I'm, from what I understand is that's what I would do on paper about this size, and then see if I'm matching my pattern to roughly that shape.
That's exactly
when
right.
it's drafted.
You know how you're highlighting it makes me think of, it should be done in a way where you basically have this form in front of you, and all you have to really do is to just do your observation as good as you can, and just take, and then those ticks tell you what to do next, and then if you just do what those ticks told you to do, you pretty much get the perfect fit. Let's aim for that.
I think if you've got that and the front view, side view on an A4 piece of paper, and then the measurements that you need, you can go like, right, sketch you, measurements done.
You know, we should develop this into an app.
Well, either app or just like, even if it was on paper, you could literally have just, well, actually you wouldn't need that. You'd have that, and then you could just have different dotted lines, however big that you want it, and then you could just say, okay, this guy is wider or has more depth, so you would choose that line and that line. And so
how awesome would it be if you just chose the silhouette, and then the app asks you, what's the silhouette looking like? You say the silhouette looks like that, and that automatically translates those lines already for you. Do you know a computer programmer, or?
I don't. Can't think of anyone.
She's like, not yet. I heard like.
All doors.
I just heard like. All right, so we have our circumference measures. Then we have direct measures. Cross chest from the front of the armpit to the other side. We have the shoulder angle, which you measure with any modern phone, or you have to go to the shed and grab your old school tool. Then we have the front balance and the back balance, which we looked at. You can do that by wrapping this elastic band around the person, adjusting it until it's level. Then we have the side depth, which is, the ruler we put under there, and we measure the depth of the side. You can include a pad if your garment has a pad. I could mention that. And then we have the armhole width, which is just from this point of your armhole to the back of the armpit to the back of the armpit, basically. Then we have the crossback, again, from that point to that point, nape to waist, and the full length. Those are the measures.
Is the width of the arm point, are the 2 points the same as the chest to chest and the crossback?
Is the point of, so is this point and this point the same as the chest?
So like when you take this measurement,
Yeah.
and then are you taking that measurement? So for the
separately.
No, but I'm saying is it the same points in space?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. So the cross chest, the cross back, those points where you measure from
Are the width.
Those are the connect. Yeah, exactly. That gives you your side plane. The pink area which we saw in that milk carton thing. All right, so oops. So then we have that, and that's it. So now here we get to that fly thing that you discussed. I mean, this is on a jacket, but we're going to have a trouser version of this as well. So shapes. And I think this is the part where a lot of novices kind of like just don't register when they make something. It's like, does the line look weird? Now, there are some lines that can look weird, although not all of them, but people tend to get necklines, shoulder lines, and armholes weird more than they get like an underarm seam or a side seam weird. They may get the position wrong, but usually it's just like, that's it, you know? They don't, but it's those curves around the shoulder. So the neck curve. Basically 2 things to look for when it's on the body. And I think this section is more relevant once they are fitting, but I think they need to know that before they have to draft, because eventually you're drafting it first and then fitting it. So, and this is technically, this is not my opinion, like, oh, if you want this style or that, this is styleless.
Yep.
But because it's whatever it is, it can be a style on its own.
Yep.
But I'm just looking at it from a technical point of view. Neck curve, from the nape bone right to the pit of the neck. It should be one smooth line when you look from the side. It shouldn't go like, well, I'll show you how it shouldn't look like. So that's how the correct neck curve looks like from the side. And from the back, it should look either dead straight or ideally just a little bit convex, just a little bit convex to go around the neck, over the nape, right? Now, the reason for that is if your neck curve is looking like this and you put on the collar, your collar is a lot less likely to distort the entire jacket because it just wraps itself over and around the neck without interfering with anything else. But if you have a dodgy neck curve, which we're going to look at in a second, then you put your collar on. That collar could pull the entire back up or the entire front, and then what you end up with is like dropping things and like taking things in where it's actually just a silly neck curve, you know? Yeah. So that's how it should look like from the side and the back. On the pattern, once you've joined your shoulders, I mean, this is a bit difficult. I still have to figure out how to illustrate this, but if you look from the top, it should look like a triangle with rounded corners and ideally a bit flat at the back. If your neck curve looks like this, so when you're about to put the collar on and you've joined the shoulders and you put your jacket on the ham, for example, and you look at your neck curve, if it looks more or less like this, you're pretty good. If it looks different, which I'll show you in a second, then you may have an issue. On the pattern, what you should have, obviously you know this should be 90 degrees. And then usually to get that smooth curve from the back of the nape into the pit of the neck, if you didn't have the lapels and the break lines, just a shirt collar, this tends to be just a 45 degree angle from right where the 90 degree angle stops and the curve starts up to the neck point, roughly. Again, this has to be quantified to such detail that I don't have to say roughly, because roughly is vague, you know? But that's more or less as far as my brain could handle it. So the incorrect lines, dodgy neck curve, it looks like this. It comes to a point at the shoulders. And then from the back, it dips in. It has a severe curve. Now you put a collar on this, either your collar is going to stand up away, or if you're really unlucky, your collar is going to pull everything up and you think your back panel needs dropping. You know what I mean? And so then you're in trouble, essentially. And then again, if you look at it from the top, it's too circular. It doesn't have the triangular shape. It's just like one big round circle, which makes it dip in at the back. And then here, again, you see the dip and the whole thing coming to a point on the pattern. Or you can have a different way. It comes to a point at the center back. So those two are tricky. Then we have the correct armhole, which is another shape that people tend to get wrong. So the correct armhole is flat at the base. It's not curved and dipped in. Because the more it's curved and dipped in, even if it's high, it still is going to pull more garment up when you move your arms. It should be like dead flat as you can get it. And then when you look from the top, 95% of people are like that, and 95 is a lot, unless you're dealing with like some mythical figure that isn't that. But pretty much every arm, just anatomically, is forward. Like people are just like this. There are less people that are like that, unless they have some physical discrepancies or whatsoever. But when you look at your armhole from the top, your armhole should be tilted forwards, and because that's how it's aligning with the body naturally. The wrong armhole is, if you look at it from the top, either dead straight, like 90 degrees like a block, or it's outward. Very few people, like there are some out there which you may not encounter them, but very few people are actually like this. Even the big guys or the muscular ones, or the anatomy is just naturally so much forward that whatever muscle mass you have to cover it with, it still is going to do this in the general public. And then from the side, it's not flat, it's curved inward. So even if it's a high armhole, it just shouldn't have the roundness at the base, because you pull it up and it pulls the entire thing up. Less comfort. All right. So then we get to the draft.